In this video, we will explore a family of verbs in Latin called deponent verbs. We'll first start with two brief examples. In our first example, we see Aeneas, the forefather of the Roman race. He is visiting a new city being built in Africa called Carthage. Our sentence is, Aeneas novum urbem mirator. Here, Aeneas is our subject, mirator is the verb, and novum urbem is an accusative singular direct object. And we translate this as, Aeneas marvels at the new city. It might strike you as strange that mirator looks like it has a passive form. Think about the passive voice endings are, ris, tor, more, mini, and entor. But we translate mirator with an active meaning. Aeneas marvels at, active voice, the new city. We'll see how this happens in just a moment. One more example. Aeneas multos casus passus est. In this example, we see Aeneas before he arrives at Carthage. Before Aeneas arrived at Carthage, sailing across the sea, he encountered many hardships, including a storm, like the one in this picture here, which destroyed some of his ships. In our example here, Aeneas is the subject, passus est is our verb. Notice how that is a perfect passive form. And multos casus is our direct object. And remember that casus is the Latin word for misfortune. So we translate this as, Aeneas suffered many misfortunes. Again, notice how the passive voice form of passus est has to be translated as an active verb when we put it in English. So what is going on with these verbs? They are deponent verbs, and very literally, deponent verbs are verbs that have put down their active forms. That's using the Latin verb deponere, which means to put something down. So these are verbs that only exist with passive voice forms in Latin. And so the way that we should think about deponent verbs is that they are passive in form, but active in meaning. Let's look back at those two examples to illustrate this concept. The first verb that we had was mirator, which we translated as he marvels at. Mirator has a passive voice form in Latin. But, as we could tell from the context of the sentence, mirator has an active force and an active meaning. And so we must construe this active meaning in our translation. We have he marvels at. We see this also in the verb passus est, which we translated as he suffered. Passus est is a passive voice form in Latin, and our translation has to reflect the active force of the verb, he suffered. As I mentioned before, deponent verbs in Latin are a family of verbs, and there are certain verbs that you will have to memorize as belonging to this family of deponent verbs. And I've broken up the verbs here by conjugation. These are some of the most important and most common deponent verbs in Latin. In the first conjugation, we have the verbs arbitror, which means to think, conor, which means to try, miror, to wonder, and moror, to delay. Notice how the first principal part always ends in the letter R. That's the first person singular ending of the passive voice. Notice how our infinitives all end in RE, arbitrari, conari, mirari, morari. And then our third principal part looks like the perfect passive indicative. So we have arbitratus sum, that's the participle plus sum, conatus sum, miratus sum, and moratus sum. Here are some common third conjugation deponent verbs. Fruor means to enjoy, fungor, to perform, ingredior, to enter, loquor, to speak, patior, to suffer. Notice again how all of these deponent verbs end in R for the first principal part, being a first person singular. And then notice our infinitives, frui, fungi, ingredi, loqui, and pati. Now remember that for the third conjugation, The active infinitive ends in short ere. And when we make this into a passive infinitive, that short ere becomes just a long I. And you can notice that long I in the 5 infinitives on this page: frui, fungi, ingredi, loqui, and pati. And again, the third principal part is the participle plus sum. Here's a continuation of third conjugation deponent verbs. We also have sequor, to follow, utor, to use, and vescor, to eat. Notice how these follow the same pattern. Are in the first principal part, a long I as the infinitive, and a third principal part with the participle plus sum. And there is one fourth conjugation deponent verb that we'll look at today: potior, which means to acquire. Again, notice how it ends in an R for the first principal part. Uri gives us the infinitive, and potito sum is the perfect participle plus the verb to be, sum. Let's translate some examples of deponent verbs in sentences. Amici vilam ingressi sunt. Our deponent verb is ingressi sunt. It's a perfect tense verb. Amici is our subject, and vilam is our accusative direct object. Now, as I said before, you'll have to memorize the list of deponent verbs. But if you haven't yet memorized that list of deponent verbs, all hope is not lost. You'll first notice that ingressi sunt is a passive voice form, but passive voice verbs in Latin cannot take direct objects, as we have vilam as a direct object in this sentence. And you think we should probably treat ingressi sunt as a deponent verb, and you look in your dictionary and you find ingredior, ingredi, ingressus sum, yes, in fact, is a deponent verb. So we translate this sentence as, the friends entered the house. Here's our next sentence. Unus ex militibus nihil loquitur. So unus is our nominative singular subject, loquitur is our deponent verb, ex militibus is a prepositional phrase, and nihil is our accusative direct object. So we recognize that loquitur has a passive form, but we have to translate it actively. It's a deponent verb. So our translation is, 1. Ex militibus, of the soldiers, loquitur, is saying nihil, nothing. One more example before we move on. Conabitur e castris discedera. Conabitur is our main verb, and discedera is an infinitive. E castris is a prepositional phrase. We have no stated subject, so our subject will have to come from the main verb. Remember that conor is a deponent verb that means to try. So we'll recognize that conabitur is a passive form in Latin, but we'll translate it in the active voice. This is, he will try, active voice, to leave discedera from the camp, e castris. And these are the most important things to know and be able to do with deponent verbs. Keep in mind that deponent verbs are passive in form, but active in meaning.